Hello YouTube. If you've watched the last video I made about powerlifting, you might have heard me say that I personally don't deload, and I consider deloads to be suboptimal for bodybuilding. And I think it's important to explain to you why, because I firmly believe that you could actually utilize the same methods that I apply for my training to your benefit, since they are actually quite easy to grasp. So let's get into it today. When I say that I never deload, it's fairly easy to grasp. In reality, what I never do is I never take a week off, I never reduce the load on my exercises, so I never sandbag on purpose, at least never by taking 100 pounds off of the bar on deadlift, for example. I never take rest days outside of Sundays, and I also never train too far from failure, meaning that I never will do something like a reps in reserve 5. I'm always within 1 to 2 reps of failure, or I go to failure. And that is for every single exercise, for training sessions that go from 2 to 3 hours every single day. And when you hear that, your first thought might be that this is impossible because it seems like it's way too much work, and logic dictates that when you work so much, you have to recover, and therefore, since I put in so much effort, there should be as many hours allocated to recovery that should therefore force me to deload. And yet, I don't have to do it. I still progress and I still get bigger year round. So how is it possible? Is it magical? Am I a mythical creature that just has an insane recovery ability? Of course, it's none of that stuff. I'm a normal human, and what I have, you can have as well. It's just a simple application of principles that I'm going to explain to you guys today so that you can train non-stop, take no rest days, and continually progress without having to take a break in the form of a deload. Now, when we talk about deloads are common practice. Pretty much any and everyone deloads, but there are applications of deload, and this is when the methods vary, because the type of deload I'm going to be mainly focusing on today is the one that was popularized by powerlifting, as I'm going to get into it. But the common factor in all aspects of deloads is that they offer rest. And rest is an essential part of building your body, because you break down muscle fibers, but then you have to actually let them rebuild themselves. If not, all of that you're doing is for nothing. It's the reason why you will hear people tell you that recovery is the most important factor. That is true if and only if you have trained before. It's going to be important. It seems like it's just a platitude, but you will come to understand that many people who deload fail to understand that the amount of recovery time and rest they allocate is disproportionate compared to the amount of stimulus they put in. Many people overestimate the damage they do to the muscle fiber, and therefore they inflate the amount of time they need to rest and recover. And that points out to a very important part of deload that I rarely hear discussed, and it's that when you look at the deload, you have to understand that what dictates the deload is the training that happened beforehand and not the other way around. Too many people let the deload dictate the training. The deload is a parameter of the training. It can never dictate it. It can never dictate the volume. It is reverse engineering at its worst, and this is why so many people actually apply deloads that end up hurting their gains. And you're going to understand why. I'm going to prove to you logically that for many of you who deload a la powerlifter, what you're doing is just you're shooting yourself in the foot because you're just wasting a lot of time. Now, when you look at the deload, what precedes the deload is always training, of course, but the length of the deload should also be dictated by the length of the training. That's also something that I believe. It's what I just told you. It cannot be the other way around. You cannot say, okay, I want to deload for a week, and then say, all right, well then based off of that, the training block before the deload will be 5 weeks. That works for powerlifters. It doesn't work for bodybuilders. For bodybuilders, it should be the opposite. You should look at the optimal amount of volume and work you can put in, and then look at what it will take for you to actually recover from that. You will come to understand, if you do it the way I just described, that most of the time you will never need to take an actual week off. And that leads us to the principles of deloading. What exactly is deloading? Well, a lot of people will tell you it's for recovery, but that's not true. That is a portion of what deloading is. The other portion that is the most important for sports like powerlifting is that it also prepares you for further performance. So it's in a sense an investment. You're not just recovering from muscle damage when you deload. You allow the body to be fully refreshed to be able to be at peak strength afterwards. Now, looking at this in this perspective, you come to understand as a bodybuilder that this means that there is 50% of the deload that is essentially useless for us. What we seek is not peak strength. What we seek is stable strength, to be able to continuously progress very slowly. It's the reason why your strength progression on a bodybuilding program will be slower than on a powerlifting program. It's not necessarily that we use different lifts, it's that what we pursue is different. That is a different topic altogether, but it explains why a lot of people don't understand the logistics of deloading, because there's half of the portion of the deload that don't necessarily apply to them, but that they try to make apply. So they misuse it. And when they misuse it the worst, it leads to the complete deload week, which is when people take a week off. Now, I can happily say that this has pretty much disappeared from YouTube Fitness. It was very prevalent 5 years ago. Now people have come to understand that it really is not optimal, even for powerlifting, to just do nothing. Most everyone who deloads nowadays and who take a week off don't really take a week off. They train, but with sub-maximal loads, which again makes a ton of sense for strength because you want to preserve it while keeping up the neurological adaptation. But for bodybuilding, it does almost nothing. And this is when we get into the discussion of sub-maximal work and the importance of going to failure. A lot of the time, powerlifters will do things like reps in reserve, like sandbagging, like speed pulls with like 40% of their 1 rep max that works for them. But if you take the same things and you apply them to bodybuilding, now it makes no sense because these things boost performance. They prepare the athlete to be at peak strength. For you, you only end up using submaximal loads that don't really challenge you, and you justify that by saying that it's just to deload. But I'm here to tell you that if you had applied a different training strategy, that deload wouldn't have been necessary if it was even necessary in the first place. Meaning that, again, a lot of people are going to deload from an amount of work that did not justify a deload. So instead of reducing the load during that 1 week, what I'm going to tell you to do is to reduce the load prior to the deload week so as to make sure it doesn't have to happen. This is when we get into the discussion of the strategies that bodybuilders need to employ, because that powerlifting deload week that focuses on future performance is, in a sense, the death of the bodybuilder, because it is going to be a large portion of the work that you will not be putting in because you are going to focus on something that simply doesn't matter, as I just explained. So this is why I say, and I repeat, that for bodybuilding, this type of deload doesn't work. I highly encourage you to never do that in your training. Even if you're a novice, even if you have poor recovery, it's not an excuse to take a week where you're going to do submaximal stuff. You should instead program previously within your head the idea that there will come no deload week to save your ass, and therefore you need to actually manage fatigue. I see too many people as well who are going to, in a sense, be overzealous with their volume or intensity because they tell themselves, well, I have my deload week coming afterwards. That is a dangerous practice because it means that not only are you going to sacrifice tonnage during the deload, but you most likely will engage in extremist practices prior to the deload. It's why I'm telling you to not do that. It leads to tonnage loss because you're not training as much as you could during that week. You're losing quality tonnage. You're using low intensity rates, so it's also a loss of tonnage in that sense. It creates instability in the training because you lose performance, an amount of performance you have to rebuild afterwards. Even if it just takes 1 week, you will find that many people get thrown off by that type of deload. It's also PR seeking, so you're most likely not in the right mindset to start with because you are sacrificing muscular damage to be able to achieve a PR without realizing that you would have gotten bigger muscles without the PR. Example, You squat 300 pounds, you want to shoot for 315. So you do 295 one week and then you take a week off and then you get your 315. Well, I'm here to tell you that if you had done 295 and then 297 or 298 and then 300, even though you're not at 315, the tonnage accumulation from the week that was lost would have resulted in bigger muscles than your PR, especially considering the fact that most likely your PR will be on 1 rep max. This is when I tell you that you have to have your mind set on something in particular. Do you want strength or do you want muscle size? Do you want to get bigger? If that is the case, then the type of deload that I just described simply isn't going to work for you. And also understand that unlike what many people might think, that type of deload doesn't promote recovery. Let me explain. You take a week off, so you're going to do submaximal work. And you believe that because you do that, it lets your muscles recover to the max, which then, if we follow the same logic, allows you to trash the muscle to a maximal extent. I have heard that a million times by people who tell me that because I don't deload, this means that I never actually go to full failure, I never actually stimulate the muscle to the max. That is wrong for one reason. Your muscle doesn't need a full week off to recover. Your muscle needs around 48 hours. You can extrapolate that to 72 hours if you so wish. But at the end of the day, even a muscle that was trashed to the max will be fresh again in 4 to 5 days. Meaning that this entire idea that the entire body will require the week off is in reality outdated. Worse than that, it also leads to poor training practices again prior to the deload. If it were just a week that you lose in terms of training accumulation, I'd be fine with that. But I have found as well that, as I explained to you, the people who engineer their programs by looking at deload weeks in particular end up training in sub-optimal fashions prior to the deload week. What I mean by this is that because you know the deload is coming up, you're going to artificially inflate the training by going either too high with the intensity or you're going to do a ton of volume, which again creates imbalances. So if you have let's say arbitrarily, a week 5, that is the week pre-deload, well, most of the time what you're going to see is that you're going to do too much on that week, work that your body cannot recover from, because you're going to tell yourself that it's justified because the deload week comes afterwards. Understand that the deload week can only help you recover from what your body can recover from, if that makes sense. Meaning that if the work capacity of your bicep is 100 and you took it to 0, to the baseline of 0, if it recovers to 100, that's all it will recover to. It will not go to 120. The way I think about recovery, and I've spoken about that on the channel in the past, is that you need to look at recovery as like a bucket. You have a bucket, and when it's full, this means that the muscle is at peak capacity. Every time you train, you empty the bucket. That's training, that's muscle fiber damage. When you rest, the bucket is going to slowly fill up until it's at 100. What you will have a tendency to do is you're going to empty the bucket entirely during your pre-deload week, and then you're going to wait until it's fully full again, and you'll think to yourself, okay, well, I got to 100 to 0 to 100, so that's 100 points. This is great. Well, maybe if you had done 2 weeks instead with the deload, you could have taken that same amount in, again, the bucket, get it to 40 on one day, let it recover to 100, that's 60 points, and then 3 days later, empty it again to 40 and let it recover again to 100. That's 120 pounds of recovery, which would be more efficient. And on top of that, keep in mind that the water at the top of the bucket is quality tonnage, because it's the water that's further away from your baseline. The baseline is when the muscle cannot even be active or can barely function anymore, which again, the more you progress, the tougher it is to reach. But you never really want to go to baseline, or at least in this sense, we need to actually separate between quality baseline and total trash baseline. Usually what you will want is, and we're getting again into the discussion of absolute versus relative intensity, you want to always keep the muscle within the range of weights you can move that makes sense. For example, if you can squat 400 pounds and you manage for some reason to get to a point where your legs cannot even squat 100 pounds, which by the way is impossible, I believe, then you might believe that you emptied the bucket to a point where you're going to get great gains. But that's not true. You just emptied it so much that now your baseline is almost close to just expiration. That is not quality. This is why I say again that deloads don't promote quality tonnage. Quite the opposite. They promote junk volume, because to be able to go that deep, usually what people are going to utilize is junk volume. You're not going to be doing a bunch of hard sets with squats from 3 to 5 reps. That's not what's going to happen. You're going to find any ways to actually empty that bucket because you absolutely want it to be full again afterwards. So in a sense, it is a type of training methodology or psychology or philosophy that focuses too much on recovery, as I explained in the introduction, which therefore sabotages the training. The recovery is, yes, paramount, but only because it comes after the training. I hope that this was clear and that the images and metaphors make sense. I think that the metaphor of the actual bucket helps you understand that you don't necessarily need to empty the bucket every single time, and that actually trying to just take 30 or 40% off of the bucket every training session is safer because it promotes quality tonnage, it promotes low injury rates, and it also promotes the ability to train frequently. And that is when I'm going to start to explain to you how I personally deload, because I personally never take that type of week off, but I still have methods to manipulate that bucket so as to make sure that I actually always stay stimulated and I keep my muscles growing, because I firmly believe that, despite popular belief, the type of people that are getting the most stimulation are the people who embrace the type of methodology that I myself espouse. I'm not the one who invented it. It's called autoregulation, and many people have been doing that throughout the year. We can call that a bodybuilding deload, and that is one that allows each muscle to get stimulated permanently. So your muscles are, in a sense, engaging in shifts. For example, let's take the bicep. You have your bicep, and let's say that right now it's at 80, all right? I'm going to let it fill maybe to 90, and then I'm going to find a way to empty it again to 60, because it is the filling up of the bucket that is going to grow the muscles. But that doesn't mean that I need to let the muscle recover fully. If anything, this actually might be a malpractice. I know it's very tempting to trash the muscle and then to let it recover fully as much as possible. But this type of mindset tends to push people towards bro splits and towards, again, a misunderstanding of training and recovery. Yes, it's important to recover, but you need to recover to a point where you can be performant again, and again, empty that top water of the bucket, that's the high quality tonnage. It doesn't need to be filled up to the top. You can be at 90 or 95%, it's still going to work. And understand also one thing, the principles of recovery and of muscle fiber recuperation is not a black and white one, meaning that, and I know that I was a culprit of that when I was young, I myself thought that if you train a muscle and then you don't let it recover and you train again on it when it's not at 100, then all you've done is for nothing. But that's not the case. Again, if you look at the metaphor of the bucket, you train and you emptied the water to 60% and it slowly filled back up to 80%. And you train again and you think, man, now I've done all that for nothing. It wasn't full. Well, understand that when that happens, the only thing it does is you're just getting, again, fatigue accumulated. So when the bucket is going to fill up again, the only thing that's going to happen is that you're going to add the water you just removed to the recovery. So it's going to take a little bit more time, but you still got some good work done. It only becomes a problem if you constantly empty the bucket or if you let it be full at all times. I say that because it can sometimes be smart to train the same muscle groups several times a day. Let's say that on Monday, you took it to 90%. And then you didn't leave it any time to recover. On Tuesday, you took it to 80%. And then on Wednesday to 70%. Well, you still got your work done. Now you can wait until Saturday to train it again. These are valid training practices. Then we can discuss whether it is more effective to just empty to 70% on one day or to split it throughout 3 days. These are different approaches. Understanding also that the amount of time you will have to put in and the amount of practices and methods you will have to apply to empty to 70% will be different than what it would take to take only 10% off. For example, you could easily take 10% off of the top with just a few pull-ups for your lats, which you can repeat every single day and that recover fast. This is also something that needs to be discussed with recovery. Recovery is valuable depending on the exercise and the muscle group and the individual that possesses these qualities. So it's also something to keep in mind. I believe that the problem with deload weeks is that they don't take such considerations in mind. They are too black and white, too simplistic, and it's why so many people like them. So many people have been told that recovery is very important, so they say, okay, I'm going to schedule a week off to make sure that my recovery is maximalized, and that functions. Your buckets will be at 100%, but again, you wasted time. You could have emptied that bucket in the meanwhile and got some work done. So, what I present to you is a method that is going to also imply that you won't necessarily always go to failure or hit PRs. I also want to clarify that. Just because I never deload, just because I train every day and I go to failure every day, doesn't mean that I always go to failure or that I always tell people to go to failure or that I always hit PR. There is an amount of sandbagging and of repetition of sets that is important in the practice of bodybuilding deloads. And I'm going to explain to you exactly how it functions like this. So essentially the way I think about it is that every time recovery allows, the muscle is hit again. So this is when you look at the fatigue accumulated by the muscle and you let that dictate the amount of recovery you're going to give it. The training dictates the recovery. So I'm going to train my bicep on Monday. When is the next time I'm going to train it again? When I'm at 100? No, that would let recovery dictate it. I'm going to train it again whenever it is possible, whenever the bicep is going to be ready to train again, which could be on Wednesday, it could be on Tuesday, it could be on Saturday, it depends on what I want. This is what is going to dictate that type of deload. By doing that, you ensure that every single muscle that can get hit will get hit and will not be left dormant, because a muscle left dormant, once it's fully recovered, either stagnates or regresses. And in terms of neurological adaptation, it's something you're going to quickly find out. It's a very tedious game in a sense of balancing every single exercise. Now, the good thing is that movement patterns share neurological patterns as well. So you don't have to bench every other day. You can just do presses every other day. It still functions perfectly well. And that is when the muscle split deload is in full effect. And you will find that this is mainly going to be dictated by frequency because it's a muscle split. So you're going to, again, look at your program and think, okay, for every single time I train, I have to hit this muscle, this muscle, this muscle. And then from that, I need to look at what makes the most sense for the several days that follows. Which muscles should I be hitting? When I program, this is how I think. I split the muscles in terms of frequency and in terms of adaptation of the muscle. When does it make sense for me to hit that muscle again? If you pay attention to my programs, that's what you're going to notice. You will notice that if a muscle is hit hard on Monday, I'm not going to get you to hit it hard again on Tuesday. I think that's common practices. Everyone understands that, but this is the basics of the basics when it comes to bodybuilding deload. Now, the other one is with the rep range. The rep range is going to allow you to control the intensity, and that's when you can deload in terms of intensity. You don't have to take weight off the bar. As I said, I never take weight off of my bar. If I am deadlifting 460, that's what I'm deadlifting. There won't be a day where I come and I touch a 440. Why? Because it's regression. It might make sense for a powerlifter who is going to rebound back up in strength, but for a bodybuilder, I always need to be able to pull 460 so that strength also carries over to my accessories and hip hinges, and I never regress in tonnage. But the only way to do that is to understand that it's okay to sandbag and hit the same weight again, and also that it's okay to go down in reps if and only if the tonnage is made up and actually completed somewhere else in the program. So this is where evolving rep ranges come into play and why I preach them so much. If you want to have an effective way to manipulate intensity on a daily basis without regressing in performance, you have to use evolving reps and sets. It will ensure that you can always keep the same amount of strength for your strength work and then make up for it somewhere else in the program with something like back off sets. It's something that I preach a ton. If you manage to have your strength work with evolving rep ranges and sets plus flexible back off sets, you will find that your tonnage will always remain the same, that your strength will always stay slowly, steadily progressing with no deloads in sight. You do not need to deload from that type of work because the frequency will take care of you. Whenever the muscle will be hit, is when you will know that you will be able to be fully capable, and then the minute details of the intensity needed for the day will be taken care of. For example, you come in and you have 1 to 3 sets of 2 to 4 reps. That gives you a wide range of control. If on that day you feel that your strength is not where it should be, or you're pre-fatigued from a previous day, you can just decide to hit 2 reps for 1 set on that day. You maintain performance. After that, you can follow that up with an exercise in the same line of specificity that is going to be 3 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps to accumulate the tonnage. It's going to keep it stable. You will find that when you come in the next time to hit that exercise, if you now want to actually up the sets and the reps for the main strength work, it will be possible. You will never have to deal with this yo-yo training of your performance going all over the place, which can be so frustrating and so damaging for bodybuilding. So that is the frequency in the intensity aspects of the bodybuilding deload. It of course also always keeps the intensity high. It's the reason why I tell you that I personally always go either shy of failure or close to failure with relevant weights. And that is sort of a given, because if you go to failure, unless your rep range is ridiculous, like 35 reps, failure dictates that you were hitting reps at a very high intensity, so they're high quality tonnage. But of course, this is only if you allow the bucket to fill up again to a certain level. To explain it to you guys, and that's an example I've given in the past, if you squat every day to failure, day 1 the bucket is 100, day 2 75, day 3 55. If you go in on day 4, the amount of weight you will be able to hit if you didn't let the muscle recover will be so far removed from what you're supposed to be hitting that now this qualifies as junk volume. Junk volume is not just the fact that you repeated too many exercises on the same day. It might be that your frequency and your scheduling is poor, and therefore you did not let recovery do its job. So it's something to keep in mind. If you always prioritize high intensity work in terms of hard sets and quality tonnage, these problems will never occur. And then the last facet of bodybuilding deloads is the volume. How do we control volume? Well, it's one of the methods I just described, but one that I particularly like for me and that allows me to continue with that type of training is exercise rotation deloads. If you have the ability to actually have an exercise be shifted with another one, and you have several rotations in place that can be just summoned like this, you'll find that you always will have the ability to do something. And usually with rotations, what I encourage people to do is to rotate different muscle groups. It does complicate the way you program, because now the frequency and the muscle groups split frequency I described for iteration number 1 is much more complicated, because you have several muscle groups that can come in and out of the program for a single day, but it also makes the adaptation and the ability to control the volume so much easier. So for example, if you train upper body like me every 2 days, and on every single iteration of your upper body, for me there are 4. Every single iteration offers a bicep exercise. Well, guess what? Every time you train upper, if you need bicep exercise and biceps volume, it's there. It's already there in the program. This is why the more you are advanced, the more complex your program becomes, but not complicated. Complex. Complexity entails a large portion of possibilities, and it's something that is always necessary the more you progress. It doesn't mean that the problem is going to be tough to navigate. If anything, it'll be easier to navigate. It's a map that you're going to make for yourself, that you're going to be intimate with. I can tell you that I haven't taken a look at my program in a year. It's ingrained in my brain. I know every single thing because everything now makes sense, and these rotations are part of it. So an example for you could be that if you are the type of person who wants to hit quads, you need to find exercises that you can put on every single lower body day that will allow you to hit quads. If you come in one day and your quads are at 65, you can just ignore it and say, okay, on that particular lower day, I do not need to hit quads, so that rotation will remain dormant. But if you do need to hit quads, you make it happen. Now the exercise is there, you do it. If you, for example, come in and the quads are at 95, you get it down to 70, and now you are actually hitting every single muscle that can be hit. I want you to think of it as if your body parts could light up when they need work or when they need recovery. If you observe your body in that fashion and you think about it when you program, you will find ways to make sure that every time a body part flashes red, which means I need to be worked, it will get worked. And every time it flashes green, it means I need to recover, you will be able to let it recover. It's also the reason why I say that this practice is the best for autoregulation. It's not just the best because it's going to allow you to stimulate every muscle that needs stimulation. It also does the opposite. It allows you to let recover every muscle that needs it. There won't be a day where you have to hit chest. No, it'll be an upper day that allows chest to be reduced to a bare minimum with the evolving rep range with only one set, or even better, to be taken out of the equation completely with the rotations. This is what I mean. This is when you get to a degree of control of the deload, when the deload is almost seamless because muscle group work can get swapped in and out of the program like it's no one's business. It's seamless, it's very effective. That system maximizes stimulus, as I said. It banks on autoregulation and autoregulated recovery, which means that it's not for everyone. I'm going to admit that. It's the reason why you need to be a little bit more advanced and you need to be in close quarters with your body and understand the way your body works to be able to make it work. But I encourage you to work towards it, just like evolving rep range, where I told you to slowly inch yourself towards it and slowly implement it in your program. It's the same in this particular case. You can slowly work towards that type of deload. And the best thing is that if you're a novice, if you just got started and you do a novice program, it should be relatively minimalistic so that you never actually empty the bucket too much. So there is space for you to play with deloads, because the deloads when you just get started are completely unnecessary. If you need to deload as a novice, you're already doing too much in the gym. You simply don't have the work capacity to do that. So it's not something you should have been doing in the first place. Now, when we are going to also discuss the arbitrary nature of deloads, what I like about bodybuilding deloads is that they're non-arbitrary, meaning that if you don't need them, you don't do them. For example, if my program has a rotation that takes away the biceps, but tomorrow I go to the gym and my biceps are fresh, I'm going to hit biceps. There's no obligation. I find that too many people have rigid scheduled deload weeks, and sometimes they're not even fatigued or anything and they still deload. That is a complete waste of time. That is just, again, doing nothing. It's not good for muscle growth. You need to understand that. The way I'm preaching deloads is to always prioritize muscle fiber damage, and that is the best way to actually grow in the long term. It also, what I preach, promotes zero junk volume, and you quickly come to understand that. I'm telling you to empty the bucket just enough every single time so as to get to the effective baseline and then go back the next day and do it again. Well, what does that mean? You never get into the range or category of junk volume, or you'll just keep digging for no reason whatsoever, or because you think that you're going to get a deload week next week, so you have to make it worth your while. It's not needed. Junk volume is not necessarily bad, but if it can be avoided for quality volume instead, it's always the best thing. This is why this system is also so effective. It minimizes it to almost zero. Now, when it comes to desensitization, I know that many people discuss that nowadays, or they think that you need to let the muscle be fully inactive for a week or 2 weeks so that it can grow. That's nonsense. Sorry, I don't think it's true at all in terms of training principles. It makes no sense that the muscle would need that. I also can tell you that I've never done that and I progress just fine. If you want to do it, do it. I personally have found a better method to resensitize the muscle, and that's, again, rotations. If you do pullovers, for example, with a dumbbell, and at some point you get tired of it or you don't feel the muscle work anymore, okay, well, do them with a cable now. Change the angle. There's a million ways to actually approach that without having to stop doing the exercise. This is bodybuilding deloads. Utilize rotations to always keep the muscle stimulated without actually having to take a break. And a wide exercise selection is always going to be a very useful tool in the toolbox if you want to employ that method as well, because it allows for very effective rotations. Now, understand one thing. Rotations are also non-arbitrary, meaning that you never have a rotation that's scheduled. You never have a rotation that says, okay, every 2 weeks I rotate. That makes no sense. because the goal of the rotation is again to sensitize the muscle or to allow the muscle to be hit when it needs to be hit and to manage recovery. Recovery being again something that depends on the time of the week, the amount of work you put in the last day, etc. It cannot be scheduled. It is something that is dependent on your ability to tell when it's needed. It's also the reason why I don't like people who rotate on a bi-weekly basis. I don't like people who rotate when they hit failure or they can't progress anymore. For bodybuilding, again, that makes no sense. You have finally hit a plateau. This means that you have reached the peak of the neurological adaptation for the movement for this week in particular. Every time you're going to hit a set, it's going to be high quality tonnage. Too many people plateau and they think, okay, it's the end of the wood because my strength has stopped. But you need to consider that it might just be that this is a weight that now, in this instant, challenges the muscle greatly, meaning that even if you don't progress in strength, if you keep hitting that weight, these are still hard sets. It's not like they stop working simply because the strength is not going back up. So it's something to keep in mind as well. We want strength progression because we want the tonnage to go up, but it's not the end all be all. What we need is quality tonnage. So that is also for the positive parts of that. Now, if you just listen to me, as I said previously, you have come to understand that bodybuilding deloads are in reality micro blocks of deloads within the program itself to, again, a microscopical level, which means also that many people are going to look at a bodybuilding program, one that I make, for example, and think, okay, there are no deloads whatsoever, but that's not true. There are deloads, it's just that they are integrated within the day. The deloads come from a very precise and finite volume and intensity manipulation. You won't see a gray block in the program or nothing happens. I took that gray block and I split it and I put patches of it on every single day. And the good thing is that the patches are connected to electricity, meaning that you can flip a switch and have them turn on, you can flip it down and you have it turn off. It is auto-regulating, and that is what, in my opinion, makes the most sense. Rough, hard blocks of self-defined work for bodybuilding is nonsensical, in my opinion, because it contradicts the very notion of stability that is so important for the ability to grow the muscle, which is why, again, I employ this practice. And these blocks within the week are split between, again, the ability to control volume intensity within the spectrum of frequency. It's something that I always preach. Never let yourself be suckered into one or the other. Bodybuilding is not just about volume, it's not just about intensity, it's not just about frequency, it's about the three. It's the holy trinity of bodybuilding. And in reality, if you think about it, volume, intensity, and frequency is the same thing. What they do is they manage fatigue. And how do you manage fatigue? With intelligent deloads. And how do you intelligently deload? The way I just described. So I hope this was clear for you. I will come out with more videos explaining my training philosophy and the way I program so that you guys can understand, apply it in your training principles, and make great gains without having to worry about things that, in my opinion, are just a waste of time. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.